When we come back to WCW Worldwide, we'll take a look at my exclusive one-on-one interview with Shane Douglas. What makes a man the franchise? We'll find out next. Welcome back to WCW Worldwide, a one-on-one with one of my all-time favorites, the franchise Shane Douglas, the former United States heavyweight champion. There's still got to be some bitter taste in your mouth about that franchise.
I had buried the hatchet with Ric Flair, and as I've spoken about it before here, Ric Flair hadn't done it the way that I had. He'd said he had, put his hand out and extended it, and then I find out behind my back he's lining up the elite to come after me to try to take me out of wrestling because of all the things that we had said. If he'd used the talent that God gave him, instead of trying to play these backstage politics and stabbing Shane Douglas in the back.
Good point. So once again, it all comes back to you and Ric Flair. So many years we heard the promos from up in Philadelphia. When you came to World Championship Wrestling, it was you and Ric Flair. Just when it seemed like it was calming down, it fires right back up, and it's the franchise and the Nature Boy Part 3.
Absolutely. It's not something I've asked for, but you know, I've reconciled myself with it, Scott. And you know me, the competitor inside of me is not going to say die. All he's really done is he's fired that tiger up inside me, and that heart is beating in my chest again. I'm ready to go. If Ric Flair wants to go round 3, I'm ready for round 3, 4, 5, and 6 if he wants to do it.
He doesn't know what he's done by igniting the fire in the franchise and one more time.
Boy, does he ever.
Well, I tell you what, let's take it back to the beginning. I mean, we're talking back into the early 1980s at Dominic DeNucci's training center in Pennsylvania with Mick Foley and the rest of that crowd.
Yeah, it goes back a long time. You know, Mick Foley and I broke into the wrestling business. I was about a year before him. He had come into Dominic's gym one day, and when I met him, he was the same thing you see now. The picture you see on the screen is what you get. He's like that. That's him. But you know, he's done good for himself and done well in the wrestling business, become a world champion. I'm proud to say that I've done the same thing. We've taken very different paths to get there, but the fact still remains in 2001 we're both players in the game.
From the training school, and we're leading up to where we are now, here in World Championship Wrestling, but from the training school there in Pennsylvania with Dominic DeNucci, you got your first big break in the old UWF, the Universal Wrestling Federation in the Mid-South Territory.
Well, you're digging up some good old memories. Yeah, Bill Watts in the UWF back in Texas. At that time, it was an Oklahoma-based company, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Then he moved to Texas as he tried to take the company nationwide. And, you know, that was really, I think, the predecessor to some of the things you're seeing in the business today, the wild action, the toe-to-toe fighting. Bill Watts pioneered that. Unfortunately, went bankrupt, but the remnants of what the UWF was, you could still see in the business today. Including
gold around the waist of the franchise, your first taste of gold as a 21-year-old UWF television champion.
Yeah, the youngest person ever to hold that belt. Looking back on it, I think I have more respect for it now than I did at the time that I held it. You know, you walk into the wrestling business, you get your first break, and before you know it, there's gold around your waist, having beaten, you know, the great Eddie Gilbert, you know, rest his soul. And, you know, you think that this is just the first of many to come, and you don't realize how special that is.
UWF consumed by World Championship Wrestling, what evolved into World Championship Wrestling, and you had a run with Johnny Ace as a tag team called the Dynamic Dudes about 10 years ago.
Boy, you're digging up all the dirt, aren't you?
I've done my research.
Well, we at that time were two young guys in the business, and WCW was trying to replicate the catch lightning in a bottle twice, so to speak, with the Rock and Roll Express and the huge success that they had in the mid-'80s. And towards the late '80s, they wanted to try to revamp that and go with something a bit different. We had a lot of fun with it. The first time in the wrestling business that I ever made money. So, you know, a lot of people come up to me today and they'll say, "Hey, the Dynamic Dudes, you know, doesn't that embarrass you?" And they'll show me pictures and stuff. And I laugh and I say, "That's the first time I got a paycheck that really made me, able to pay my bills."
Well, that was your big break in professional wrestling, and you parlayed that into a run up north that ended up with you becoming Intercontinental Champion for another promotion. And from there, it's been nonstop, grow. But I understand that you had a run in ECW there in Philadelphia. You were the World Heavyweight Champion in the organization, but you took some time off from the sport entirely to care for your father.
Right. My dad in 1991, excuse me, contracted or came down with emphysema, late-stage emphysema, and tough old Army sergeant from World War II, and wasn't going to let the disease get him, and he fought for about 3 years after they'd given him 3 days to live. But the whole outcome of it was he couldn't live alone. He couldn't be alone because on oxygen, you become forgetful, might leave the fire burning on the stove or something. So he needed to have somebody around, and to me, family always comes before this business, before any business. business. So when my father became ill, to me, it wasn't even didn't even take a second to figure it out. It was automatically at that time going to leave the business and go take care of Dad.
How long were you away from pro wrestling?
Almost 2 years, and at the same time is when I started my teaching career.
As a teacher, you have a master's degree in education. You're a very well-educated man, more educated than most wrestlers that we see today,
Yeah.
and that's a compliment, by the way. But the time away, caring for your dad, that will toughen you up. Every match against Eddie Gilbert or the Midnight Express in the 1980s, I'm sure nothing made you tougher than what you had to do for your father.
No, absolutely not. You know, when you see a person that you look up to, everybody thinks their father's invincible and indestructible, and my dad was as close to that as I'd ever seen in my life. You know, just a tough old coot of a guy. You know, he wasn't going to give up, and he wasn't going to let this disease get him. When the doctor said he had 3 days to live, he fought through that, and 3 weeks later they said, well, he's got maybe 3 months to live, and he ended up going 3 years past that. He really was a fighter, but, you know, to see your father laying there on the hospital bed and unable to breathe, you know, take his next breath and being forced there with respirator and ventilators and medicines being pumped into him, it really is a sobering thing. It makes this thing called reality a bit more stark for all of us, and it's really a tough thing to go through.
Don't miss part 2 of this interview next week on Worldwide. Following that personal tragedy for you, you got back into the sport of pro wrestling, as we said, a run as Intercontinental Champion up north. Tell us a little bit about your time in ECW.
I was very successful there, but I applied a lot of what I'd learned in WCW and the other places that I'd wrestled, not only of the sport of the game, but also the game in the back that we call politics.
When you got into ECW, you had to pull from your experience as a tag team partner back in 1992, late 1991, of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. You two were World Championship Wrestling, WCW World Tag Team Champions at that time.
Yeah, and what a great experience. I mean, anybody in the business that knows Ricky Steamboat knows, A, that first of all, he's a true gentleman. Secondly, he's one of the greatest competitors this game has ever seen. I would watch Ricky from the apron, and it was like reading a manual, a how-to manual of being a professional wrestler and being a star in professional wrestling.
It all seemed to coalesce in ECW, and you became, for the first time, a world heavyweight champion.
Right, and it was, you know, it was a real scary thing. I mean, everybody wants to excel and become world champion in this sport. Nobody steps in the front door of an arena thinking they want to just get a paycheck tonight. Every single person that's ever strapped on a pair of boots and pulled on a pair of tights has endeavored to be a world champion.
And in addition to being the world heavyweight champion, you also became the franchise.
Well, the franchise player for any team is the most important player on the team. It's the player that apparently the team can't do without. So this company that was starting off had to do something. They had to have a franchise player. And so it was just a natural. It mixed together. You had Shane Douglas, who the company was going to be built around. The franchise was just the name that sort of happened. The fans started calling me that, and the promotion started calling me that, and it sort of stuck.
Sort of stuck. You're still the franchise. We're here in WCW, and you are still the franchise. Take us through the transition from ECW into World Championship Wrestling roughly 1.5 years, 2 years ago.
A much bigger game. When you walk into WCW in the dressing room, you've got guys like Ric Flair, who is the master chess player of all time in this game, the master politician, and suddenly you're not just having to fight your way in the ring, you're also having to fight all the politicking and backstabbing and you know, false smiles in the dressing room. And when you're suddenly the franchise in WCW, and realizing that in order for that name to make sense and to be real and to be legitimate, which has always been a cornerstone of my career, that you better step up to the plate and you better be prepared to fight those battles in the dressing room and play that chess game with Ric Flair and go into the ring and fight some of the best talents in the wrestling business today. Booker T, Scott Steiner, Rick Steiner, Jeff Jarrett. I mean, go down the list of names here, the best in the business today. So to be the franchise here, I've got to step up to the plate, and I'm doing that.
And wrestle hurt. You have a broken wrist as we conduct this interview, and that hasn't stopped you. You haven't asked for time off. You haven't begged out of matches. In fact, you lost the United States Heavyweight Championship while wrestling in a title defense with a broken wrist.
When I got hurt, I never asked for an easier road. I don't ask for a quarter, don't give a quarter, but I had never expected Ric Flair in his CEO role to take that position of power and to use it against me like he did. I mean, I've done a lot of things in this business, some I'm proud of, some I'm not proud of, but I can honestly say I've never walked into the ring willingly attempting to try to hurt somebody or capitalize on somebody's injury. Ric Flair has done just that. At a point, I mean, Rick Steiner's a tough opponent when you're 100% healthy. You know, at 70%, I gave Rick Steiner the fight of his life. So the question Rick Steiner's going to ask himself is, if the franchise was 100% that night, could he have taken me? Ric Flair has to ask the question, when the franchise gets back, not if, when he gets back to 100%, what's the outcome going to be? Because unless he's able to break my wrist every week or break my ankle every week, every single week he can bet that the franchise is going to be breathing down his neck because he's made this thing personal again. I put the past behind me. I shook his hand, apologized about the things that I had said. He had said the same thing. Now I know that he wasn't being sincere with his apology. I was with mine. So that's fine. We've brought the past back to the forefront. We now know what he's about and what I'm about, and the franchise is going to be back. I'm fully prepared to go back in against Ric Flair. I'm looking forward to it.
It's not with Rick Steiner. Your animosity is with the boss, the CEO, Ric Flair, the mastermind of everything that's happened in World Championship Wrestling, including you're losing the U.S. belt.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's no love lost for Rick Steiner. Rick Steiner went out and did his bidding. You know, if Ric Flair says jump off a building, I wonder if Rick Steiner would do that. Apparently he would. You know, Rick Steiner's always been a great competitor, one of the toughest guys in this business. But I think at this point, the guys in the dressing room better start talking about the franchise, because at 70% with a broken wrist, I took Rick Steiner nearly 11 minutes before he was able to beat me. I've seen Rick Steiner go through other wrestlers in 3 and 4 minutes. So again, I want Rick Steiner to ask himself the question. He's got the U.S. title around his waist at this point. How much longer will he have that title around his waist? And his brother Scott Steiner ought to start thinking, when the franchise comes back, will the world title still be mine?
I want to ask you to do something for me, Shane Douglas, franchise. Take a look in this camera. Ric Flair is watching this broadcast. Does he watch every WCW broadcast? Tell him what's in the franchise's heart about what he's done to the franchise.
Ric Flair, this personal note goes right to you. I want you to look into my eyes. They say it's a window on a man's soul, Ric Flair. In my soul, there's a champion, a lion, a courageous man fighting, waiting to get his point to step up to you, Nature Boy. You can hide behind this elite all you want. You can hide behind the game of politics, but the day will come that these casts will come off. These broken bones will heal, and when that happens, and systemically I start to work myself through the elite, I've told you before, Ric Flair, their blood will be on your hands. Their blood will be on your hands, Rick. You made me the franchise. That hatred that built up in me all those years ago as a young man looking up to you is what's making me what I am today. I am damn well prepared to prove I'm a franchise here in WCW. So, Rick, if I've got to bring that hatred out of my chest, that heart beating in my chest, if I've got to pound it to your doorstep, Nature Boy, I always want you to remember when I walk up to you right before I hurt you, you made me, Rick. You made me.
So in spite of everything that's happened, the franchise, Shane Douglas, still has a thorn in his paw about the Nature Boss, the CEO, Ric Flair.